All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the next edition of the WISM, now under the Center for Global Democracy, as we've kind of going through this rebrand. So today we're excited to have Joost Kappelhof, who's the head of the methodology department at the Netherlands Institute for Social Research, and he's also part of the ESS core team. And he's going to be presenting a little bit about how the ESS deals with some undesirable interviewer behavior. So yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Luke. And also, I'd like to extend my thanks to you and Liz for inviting me to give this presentation. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. Let me start by sharing my. See if I have some. Oh, hang on. Where's the? Wait. Can everybody see me? See the presentation?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So today I'm gonna have a talk about the European Social Survey Framework and what we do to prevent and monitor and assess the potential for undesirable interviewer behavior. And of course, all the challenges we encounter, and given the fact that this is a large international comparative survey and all the lessons we've learned, hopefully they will be of use to this audience as well. So first of all, this is basically the outline of my talk. I'm just going to say a little bit about who I am. I'm going to say a little bit more about what European Social Survey is. Gives people some idea. I'm assuming most of you are at least familiar with the name. And then I'll go into more detail regarding this work package on undesirable interviewer behavior. So my personal background, I have a PhD in survey methodology and survey statistics. I'm the head of the methodology department at the Netherlands Institute for Social Research. This is a Dutch independent government research institute aimed to evaluate the effectiveness of Dutch policies, mostly on social, cultural, socio-economics issues. And I've been a part or a member of the European Social Survey core scientific team since 2005. And since 2019, I've been also a work package leader on this particular work package on desirable interviewer behavior, and also the institutional head from my company for the European Social Survey. And this particular work package comprises of 4 other colleagues. Paulette Flore, Roberto Briceno Rosas, Katrien Verl, and Mai Dusak from different universities or organizations within the ESS world. So the European Social Survey is a large international comparative survey with the aim to provide high quality open access data, measuring a very wide range of public attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors throughout Europe. It's been awarded both the Descartes Prize from the European Science Foundation, and it has been a European Research Infrastructure Consortium, and even a landmark since 2013. So their main aims, as I mentioned before, it's the idea to interpret and monitor public attitudes, values within Europe and how they change. And also the aim of the ESS as well is, of course, to improve and consolidate methods for cross-national survey measurement and methodology standards. As you can see in the rest of the slide, a lot of countries have participated, at least a few rounds, but there are also a substantial number of countries that have participated in each round up till this point, so 11 rounds. I'll give you some key facts on the ESS as well. So it's a biannual survey. It starts every 2 years. The first 11 rounds have been completely face-to-face data collection. Round 12 is going to be a sort of split half. So a half sample will be randomly allocated to do another face-to-face data collection, and there is a self-completion arm as well. And from round 13 onwards, it's going to be self-completion only. On average, so far, the face-to-face in the source language was about 60 minutes of actual interview time. In total, I think on 38 countries have participated. Round 11 had 31 countries, 50,000 interviews per round, 3,000 interviewers per round as well. Of course, being an international comparative survey, there's a large focus on comparability. We do a lot of outreach for training and learning. And of course, I think, well, many of you might know as well, everything is publicly available, both the data as well as the documentation. So the short structure and governance is that we have a core scientific team that informs and discusses with the ESS director the main issues as to how to set up the ESS survey. The General Assembly is basically the financiers forum that mainly consists of people from national governmental institutions or national science foundations of the participating countries. You have additional scientific advisory boards aimed to see, okay, what are very important sociological and economic topics that might come up in the coming years. So this is both relevant for policymakers, but mostly also for social science research. We have additionally, besides a lot of very experienced methodologists and statisticians in the core scientific team, we also have an additional methods advisory team to keep us sharp and prevent a sort of tunnel vision sometimes. So that's always been very useful. And besides that, since the ESS has a sort of does have a central team, but in the setup and in the implementation, it also has a very decentralized structure. So you also have national coordinators responsible for the actual implementation of the survey in each participating country. And then you have a wide range of other working groups hovering around this sort of basic structure. These are the sampling expert panel, the fieldwork teams, the website teams, etc. So it's basically quite a large group of people working on this ESS project. And I think one of the main issues is, of course, when we go from a national to a cross-national survey, you have two things that come more into focus. First of all, it becomes increasingly more complex. And also there's a shift of focus, not only from things being very focused on improving the accuracy of your measurements and representatives, but also the comparability issue becomes, of course, much more important in this context. And the complexity, at least as we found in the ESS, deals with all sorts of issues. Funding, given the particular structure of the ESS, is a big issue. Not every country is able to have large sums of money available for the ESS. It's also not always clear when it's available, given the fact that some countries have different financial terms when they decide whether or not to allocate funding for these projects. An ongoing debate. There's a lot of complexities about how you define the target population when people are ineligible, given the varying living conditions in different countries. Each country seems to have a very different sampling frame, so that also poses a lot of interesting questions. Timing of the field work, especially when it comes to holidays, national holidays. It can vary. The survey culture can be very different in different countries, different customs. For example, you can have countries that where it's common practice to conduct the interview at the door opening, and other countries it was very common for other surveys to have a sort of substitution allowed, so that also if you use interviewers are trained with that sort of model, it's very different and challenging for them to change to this model. The survey infrastructure can be very different. You can have, of course, very advanced countries being able to do all sorts of complex monitoring and rollouts, whereas other countries still have to send interviewers through the mountains. So it's very different. And of course, privacy and archiving, even despite the GDPR, there can be additional national challenges, and in case of other countries, for example, like Russia, that did participate several rounds, not anymore, or for obvious reasons, archiving for personal data or data from their country to our archiving institute that is located in Norway could have been a challenge. So these are just a number of the complexities what we have to deal with in the context of this sort of European-wide social survey. I just briefly mentioned already the fieldwork organization, the basic organization, that it's very decentralized. We work with national budgets. The fieldwork organization has to be implemented on a country level, where we have a country national coordinator appointed, usually somebody from a university with a large background, not only in methodology, but also as a social scientist. We found that to be very relevant because they know about things that might work in the implementation of a particular country. But what is also very obvious is that the chain of control for us can be quite distant from the core scientific team. We are in contact with the national coordinator, is in contact with the project manager, is in contact with the field director, and they are in contact with the interviewers. So this is quite a large chain. So this is also challenging when it comes to your sphere of influence and how able, of course, you are to ensure the correct implementation and execution of fieldwork, and that they adhere to all sorts of standardized protocols we want them to. So in the last few rounds, we have increasingly tried to be more geared towards standardization with something we call internally country context. These are people that are part of the core scientific team, and they are more focused also on the centralized fieldwork monitoring by means of a fieldwork monitoring system. So when it comes to my main topic of today's talk, it's about how we developed a framework as the ESS on how to look at undesirable or desirable interviewer behavior. I will switch back and forth between undesirable interviewer behavior and desirable interviewer behavior. I'd like to start and to point out, of course, that the ESS has always had a very large focus on survey data quality assurance. There's a lot of things being done with regards to input harmonization, specifications, protocols, training materials that we provide. There's always been a focus on quality monitoring during fieldwork, and at the end, on quality assessment, fact checks, data delivery protocols, pre-release consistency checks on the data. But there was never any specific focus on interviewer behavior as such. And in the mid-10s, there were signals or worries, sometimes papers saying, we've analyzed ESS data. Sometimes we see traces of something that is about interviewer. It could be due to interviewers having very large effects. And at the same time, of course, new technologies emerged that would allow for much more centralized monitoring and real-time checking that were available in most, if not all, participating countries. So these two factors both made ensured the push towards a sort of the development of a new work package with the aim, of course, to develop this sort of overall approach on desirable interviewer behavior and its implementation throughout the entire survey lifecycle. The goal of the work package of desirable interviewer behavior has been, of course, to inform the director and the core scientific team about the level to which interviewers across these countries adhere to our standards and protocols. We also wanted to sort of provide a landscape of interview indicators that allow us to uncover how these data quality can be affected by interviewer behavior. Importantly, we also wanted to be able to at least start with a foundation for a fair and comparable assessment of these issues with respect to interviewer behavior across the different countries, between the different countries. And of course, any areas of concern or improvement we want to be able to point out and to see if there are systematic differences between groups of countries. Are there areas for improvement to minimize the sort of what we call avoidable variation between countries? Sometimes it's unavoidable. For example, you have to think about the fact that countries might have a sample frame with named individuals, or you might have some version of a randomized route. So these things are unavoidable given countries, but there are other things that might be avoidable. So of course, you always have to be sure what you can minimize and what you can't. So when we think in the ESS about undesirable interviewer behavior or non-adherence to standards or protocols, there are, I think, several considerations we take into mind. So first of all, it's important to not just substitute just by fabrication of data by interviewers alone. That's just one type of undesirable interviewer behavior. Of course, a very undesirable type of interviewer behavior, but one, there are others as well. And we should also not look at it purely through the prism of interviewer effects, because they are sometimes not necessarily the result of interviewer behavior alone, or it's not always necessary to avoid or under the control of the interviewer. It's also important to realize that it affects both the representation and the measurement dimension of the total survey error framework. Undesirable interviewer behavior is multifaceted, and the context matters a lot. Non-adherence can at the same time be intentional or unintentional. It can be avoidable or unavoidable, as well as justifiable or not justifiable. Intentional or unintentional, of course, very obvious. The interviewer can unintendedly made a mistake. That happens, or intentionally made a mistake. Sometimes it's avoidable or not avoidable. This could just be because an interviewer looks a certain way, and that has an effect on the interview. And sometimes it's justifiable or not justifiable. For example, you rather not want an interviewer to speed through the interview, to read out the questions quickly and push the interviewee through the interview. But if an interviewer realizes that this person is ready to stop the interview at the end, then you could understand why an interviewer might go a bit quicker to avoid this break-off at the end. So these are all at play at the same time. Furthermore, it's important to realize that undesirable interviewer behavior is not necessarily constant within an interview. The example I just named, it could just happen at the end, or it could be happening at a particular difficult or boring part of the questionnaire. It's also not necessarily constant within an interviewer, the interviewer or the interviewer workloads. It could be happening with one particular interview, but not necessarily with another. And it's not necessarily constant across interviewers. Another important thing to keep in mind is that it can be caused by different factors. And here we distinguish enabling factors, facilitating factors, and factors that can accentuate undesirable interviewer behavior and its consequences. And here, for example, I name address samples as an enabling factor. If you have a name of listed individuals that allows for far less degrees of freedom of the interviewer to show undesirable interviewer behavior, then if the interviewer is responsible as part of a multi-stage sampling design to do the final selection in a household. Facilitating factors are, of course, the fact that whether or not you have a large and direct supervision of how interviewers go through the fieldwork or not. That could make it easier for interviewers to show undesirable interviewer behavior. Furthermore, when it comes to the payment structure, these can even further accentuate the undesirable interviewer behaviors. An interviewer might have different roles within him. It's about contacting and selecting. It's about interviewing itself and the correct collection or recoding of data. And if you have a payment structure that sort of emphasizes on one particular element of their role and not another, you might end up having particular undesirable interviewer behaviors accentuated as a result of that. For example, we require them to also have a very detailed account of each contact attempt, as well as, of course, do the interview, select the right person, and do the interview. And if we only pay people for the interview itself and not for the other roles, we might end up having interviewers sort of focusing on getting an interview and not necessarily putting time and effort in to code the data correctly, or even sometimes, as a result of the payment structure, favor just getting anybody in the household instead of doing the right selection procedure. When it comes to detecting undesirable interviewer behavior, it requires at least, of course, timely data and multiple indicators in the context of the ESS and the GDPR, where most of the ESS countries have to adhere to. Purely a direct GPS on interviewers is not really GDPR proof. So we are really and even that measure is not infallible as such anyway. So there's not really any single indicator to determine whether or not undesirable interviewer behavior occurred, mostly because undesirable interviewer behavior is so multifaceted. It also requires, of course, transparency from everybody involved and good documentation. It requires indicators and actions focused on undesirable interviewer behaviors at the various stages of the survey life cycles. We distinguish here the planning and prevention stage, the monitoring and detection during fieldwork, and the assessment and evaluation post-fieldwork. Another important requirement for us in this or international comparative context was that not only should these indicators be informative, they should be uniform and comparative and cover both total survey error dimensions. So this is a sort of wish list of what they have to adhere to, these indicators. So this is basically a sort of schematic overview of this framework, where you can clearly see the 2 dimensions in the left-hand side and the different stages. And the green flow back is geared towards continuous improvement. So the feedback given at the end on the post hoc, you can take it into the planning and also monitoring and detection stage, for example, for the next round of the ESS. So when it comes to the actions we do and how we focus on ensuring desirable interviewer behavior during the planning and prevention stage, well, some, of course, we already mentioned. It's things that we require people to do in the specifications, what is clear in the protocols and also in the reimbursement, the type of training we give. Also things regarding input harmonization. So the ESS now has something that we call the tool of suites. That is basically all the software tools required to conduct the survey, that they come from the same provider, which is another member of our core scientific team, is Center Data, also located in the Netherlands. So they would provide the same questionnaire for everybody, the same questionnaire software. They would provide the same monitoring tools, etc. In the second phase, we of course, to monitor and detect, we make use of a fieldwork management system. We also make use of an interim data set analysis tool that is required to conduct an analysis with when you have collected about 1/3 of your planned number of interviews. And of course, there is a whole back check regime as well. In the third phase, so we do again a sort of interviewer behavior tests on the pre-release data. These are the data that all the national coordinating teams deposit at our central archive that is used, where we sort of release and show the data from. And in order, before they release the data, they do this consistency checks, and also we do this interviewer behavior tests on that. And if something suspicious comes up, then of course we follow up with the national coordinators, and if possible also with the survey agency. I'd like to go in a little bit more detail about the monitoring and detection of undesirable interviewer behavior during the ESS fieldwork. We basically use three types of information sources. The first is the contact form data. These are the data set that basically lists each contact attempt, date, time, result, etc., who the interviewer was, these sort of things. The interim interview data set, so that's basically the 1/3 of all completed interviews that moment during the fieldwork when we reach that point. That's the information we use to do the quality checks on the main data itself, and of course the back check procedures. When it comes to the monitoring of the evolution of the fieldwork progress itself, and then focused on contacting and selection, we use all sorts of paradata to inform on the contact and selection as a CST, and these are then these specific country contacts. They have access to this device called a system called the Fieldwork Monitoring System, and that allows us to detect issues and follow up with the national coordinating teams. And the idea is basically you have two types. You have interviewers working in countries on laptops or that directly upload the collected information right into the system, and you have a system where that is not done in real time, but they have to collect and upload the information via the survey agency on a weekly basis. It's important to note that this fieldwork monitoring system only contains a subset of all the contact form data that is collected. And recently we also included a respondent selection procedure indicator, because especially when it comes to address or household-based samples, that you first have to find the right household and do the selection procedure at the household to make sure that you select the right person to be interviewed. And we want to make sure also to get information whether or not interviewers might systematically deviate from what you can expect on probability. These examples show the type of information that you can get as well. You can see on the response rate per interview that the interviewers are on the horizontal axis, and they're sort of in ascending order, interviewers with a relatively low response rate up to interviewers that show a near perfect response rate or a perfect response rate, which also gives us, of course, reason to follow up and to find out what's going on. The other one gives you an overview of the same idea that interviewers are listed on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis you have the number of interviews they achieved in a particular day. And then you can see, of course, you have interviewers achieving a lot of interviews in a single day. So this is things we would follow up on. And usually we'd say to the survey agency or the national coordinating team, just not only follow up on those particular interviews, but follow up on everything the interviewer has been doing. I see when it comes to this part of the fieldwork where we look at the interviewing process, we use the main data to inform us, of course, but that's only basically on 1/3 of all the data we need to collect. That moment in time during fieldwork, that's when we do this particular check. And the checks are done by the national coordinating team or survey agency, and they have to run this tool on this specific data set. So this data set stays within that survey agency also for GDPR reasons. However, this tool has been developed by our work package, and it's a sort of one-click system. You receive it, it installs it on the laptop. You can run it on all sorts of the different formats and how your data is run. It's run in R, and you sort of get a standardized PDF looking at indicators like time and speed, non-response, response patterns. It also, of course, is a focus. We focus more on getting more and better standardized timers in the questionnaire. But basically, this is what it does. And to give you an overview, these are the 10 indicators or elements we look at when it comes to detecting issues of interviewer behavior from the interim data set. So these are, of course, things very much dependent on the timestamp of interviews. So that's why it's very important to ensure that they are placed at exactly the same positions in the questionnaire and not in slightly different positions when it comes to questionnaires that are different between countries. Some of it is focused on item non-response and also a large part on response variance or non-variance thereof. I'll give you a short example here. So if you can see the red circle, here you see we look at the time interval between consecutive interviews done by the same interviewer within a particular country. And we say, okay, an interval that lasts less than 30 minutes is somewhat suspect. It can happen, of course, but it's suspect. And here you can see with this particular interviewer that he or she conducted 3 interviews to have a minimum of 3 interviews to have 2 time intervals. And both of them show that it's less than 30 minutes. So this is something we would deem as suspect, and especially if this occurs a lot more. I see that I'm already at 6:30, so I might skip the information about back checks and go to the part that I also wanted to say about assessment and evaluation. We basically look at 2 things. First of all, we inspect cases for poor data quality prior to the data release. And of course, we try to assess the impact of interviewers on that particular set of data. Here we use the same set of 10 indicators. Some indicators actually comprise multiple indicators like interviewer performance rates. These are not just personal response rate, but also, of course, refusal rates and non-contact rates, etc. Some of them are focused to give us some idea about the representation dimension. Others are focused on the measurement dimension. Of course, there is a conditionality at play, but we look at these for this particular reason. We use a sort of multi-dimensional analysis approach to assess interviewer adherence to these indicators. First of all, of course, we aggregate from the individual respondent level to the interviewer level in order to compare means, variance, success rates, etc. between interviewers. We then also try to aggregate to the country level to see are there different patterns with respect to interviewer behavior on the country level. Then the next step is we also look at interviewer effects and all sorts of distorting factors that could influence the way in which we're able to interpret the results of these different undesirable interviewer behavior indicators. And then as a final step, we even have a higher aggregate assessment to see overall if there are additional patterns of risk that emerge with respect to interviewers across all the participating countries. And when we move from basically suspect interviews to suspect interviewers, we need to set thresholds to detect a suspect interview and interviewer behavior. And we also have to set thresholds to detect a suspect interviewer. Basically, we have to flag repeat offenders of a certain behavior. And these things allow for a more straightforward comparison of particular undesirable interviewer behavior between countries. So as an example, in the first step, we do per round, per country, show the number of times an overlap of an interview time occurs for the same interviewer, as I showed in the previous example. Then to go to the next step, we need the proportion of interviewers within a country, within a round, for whom this behavior is observed frequently. So in this case, we set a threshold of interviewers that have a minimum of 5 detected overlaps as a sort of repeat offender. So this sort of gives you a short overview of all the different thresholds per indicator that we use. And then I shouldn't put in the additional step of what makes the threshold of something being a repeat offender. I can go in that afterwards a bit more if there's questions. But here you get a sort of sense of the information that you get as a result of that. And again, here I circled, in this case, Cyprus. And what you see here is, first of all, the grayish bar shows the proportion of flagged interviews of having an overlapping interview times. And this shows that approximately 15% of the interviews conducted in Cyprus had overlapping interview times. In the second, the circle showed the proportion of flagged interviewers who have shown this behavior at least once in their workload. Here, and this is about 45% of all the interviewers involved in Cyprus show this behavior. And the third, the red triangle shows the proportion of repeat offenders, interviewers that have showed this behavior more than 4 times. This is about 30% of the time, of 30% of the interviewers that worked on the ESS in Cyprus. And here it's important to note that these are, of course, indicators. It could very well be that an interviewer had to cut an interview short and had to return back to that person a day later or 2 hours later, and in the meantime had another interview. Or it could be something with the timer. So this is not necessarily direct proof of something that is going on, but it does make you pause and want to go back and find out what's going on. When I'm talking about distorting factors, as I mentioned before, that can affect, of course, how we can evaluate this undesirable interviewer behavior using this set of indicators and approach. There are many, many different distorting factors, not only the workforce, the sample size, the location of the sample unit within a country, the number of sample units within a sampling point, the number of interviewers, also the level of interpenetration of interviewers and sample designs, basically the dispersion of interviewers across geographical areas, and all sorts of other factors, the type of sample, technical issues, processing issues, country-specific issues. So there are many things to keep in mind when you get this information. I'm gonna, for the interest of time, I'm gonna skip this example as well. I can revisit this. And I'd like to pause for a minute about all the challenges and lessons we've learned. So first of all, it's necessary, of course, to always follow up if you find something that is suspect in the data. But we've learned it's not always possible, especially if there's just more time and you have a commercial survey agency that might have already moved on to a different project. The interpenetration of observed results, especially the challenges to disentangle interviewer from area effects. This can obscure a lot of the information that we get. The setting of thresholds, this is about probabilities, it's not certainties. Interviewers can be flagged as for showing this behavior, but they can still have perfectly adhere to the protocol, as I mentioned in the case of the overlap of interview times. The other point is somewhat related to quality of the indicator. An indicator is just that, an indicator, and other factors could affect what the indicator actually measures. We also have quite a large number of indicators that sometimes makes it difficult to assess specific groups of interviewers to see, okay, who's the most problematic of all of them. So maybe we were able to combine them even further for easier interpretation. And one of the other challenges we've encountered is our analysis approach. Sometimes an interviewer doesn't have enough interviews didn't conduct enough interviews to be included, and that can lead to biased results, only showing actually quite successful interviewers and interviewers that stopped or only did 2 or 3 and then stopped. They could be having a lot of undesirable interviewer behavior in their work. So this is also an important issue to keep in mind. Going forward in terms of continuous improvement on the monitoring and detection of interviewer behavior during fieldwork, our team also have developed a tool that is called, or software that is called the virtual surround impression of interviewer location, which takes in account all sorts of ethical and privacy considerations of interviewers and respondents. it's GDPR proof. It's unique, and privacy guaranteed. For interested readers, I've included the reference in the slide, and I think this is all I wanted to say today because I'm running very much over time. I'm going to stop share my screen, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I thought it was really interesting and relevant for our work, especially the framework you outlined for thinking about these issues. It was helpful, like, specifically how we can think about things on our side to minimize those and how it's not always, I guess, malicious, or there are certain factors that can cause interviewer mistakes more likely in certain areas than others. I like that piece of it. Um, yeah, so if anybody has any questions, you can use the raise hand feature and unmute your mic. Otherwise, you can just put it in the chat and I can ask it.
It must have been very clear, or it's been an overload of information. Has to be
Yeah,
one.
I have one question. So how much do you tell interviewers about the whole monitoring process and the metrics that you use? Because I could see it both ways. Like it's helpful to tell them
Yeah.
what they're being judged on so that they can work towards like, making sure they're doing things correctly. On the other hand, if they're being told what they're being observed on, maybe they like just focus on those areas and don't
Mm.
you know, follow all the
Well,
protocols other areas.
well, the last round we had to inform as part of their briefing and protocol, had to inform that they were being monitored in a more systematic way because we used personal data. We wanted to use their interviewer ID for analysis purposes, so that sort of required us to inform them about our intentions. We didn't inform them about how and what we specifically monitored them on. Uh, we've had a very wide range of indicators. So I think if we would inform them about what we would monitor them on, I tend to think it might have a beneficial effect more than them being better prepared to cheat the system. Because they have to sort of continuously keep this checklist of 10, 11 indicators in the back of their mind. And I think that's even more challenging.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we just needed to give a second for people to type. So I'll ask these questions in the order received. So from Heidi Geyer, do you ever have time to intervene and actually remove an interview from the project?
Yeah, as a result of this, interviews have been removed from the data set. Also in the last round for some countries. So based on this sort of the check on the pre-release data check and the interim data check that has occurred yet. But that I think that's also a very important thing to, in order to be rightly placed in the survey lifecycle to do this in a timely fashion, it does take some work to get to that point. Otherwise, you end up having doing this analysis on the release data, and that might be very useful for users, but you cannot really intervene anymore. So you have to be positioned in the survey lifecycle to do this in a timely manner.
Yeah.
And we've been positioned for that, especially quite well in round 11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from Daniel Montalvo, thanks for sharing your work. Does the ESS impose a limit on the number of interviews an interviewer can carry out during the course of a project? If so, what's
Yeah, we've had in this in the specifications that an interviewer is not allowed to work on more than 48 sample units. However, in practice, and we've been sliding a bit on this as well. I think now the common idea is more 48 sample units per interviewer, at least in the first phase of fieldwork. So if there's like a non-response follow-up phase or additional phase, that is not even explicitly counted as such. But usually if interviewers are, if an agency plans to issue more than 48 sample units to an interviewer, they have to check and get permission from the core scientific team and to be able to do that. But yeah, it's also about finding the right balance, because sometimes you have a very few interviewers, so you sort of have to, yeah, there's only a few knots you can turn to ensure that fieldwork is done in a timely manner. So sometimes you're just forced to allow more than 48 units to be worked on by a single interviewer. But we do check also on in previous rounds whether or not they have very high estimated interviewer effects, whether or not we would allow something like that to occur.
Yeah. From Steve Glazerman, at what point do you conclude that there is a problem with a questionnaire protocol rather than the interviewer?
It's a very good point. That varies, and that's stuff we're learning all the time. So it's definitely when interviewers are flagged as repeat offenders in this analysis, in type of analysis, our first response is always, what could be the other explaining factor? Could it be that there is a computer glitch or a processing error or technical issue? So this is mainly what we first focus on. And then by ruling out these sort of explanations, you end up by having just the one. And these things become more pronounced, of course, if you see a particular behavior very much only within a handful of interviewers within a country. So it becomes more challenging to believe that it could be other factors. But yeah, it's about probabilities and not certainties. So.
Question from Benjamin Thompson. Can you display that slide with that listed all of the various QC points?
Yeah, that's the first threshold. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Let me check. I hope it's readable. A moment. I even have a more detailed slide that also shows the threshold where we deem something to be like. Can I? Oh, this one. No, next. Sorry, this one, I guess.
Duration, speed, time of day. Yeah.
I can't see
Did you
any
have a
questions
follow-up
now.
about
So.
this, or did you just want to see it again? Just missed it the first time. Okay. So, can you say more about the VSI? What type of information, knowledge, skill, uh, what type of data files and what type of software is needed, et cetera?
Well, we run everything in R. So everything is done in R Studios, and then it could use SPSS stated data. That's quite flexible, and
And
everything is open source. So.
okay, so it's just a matter of knowing like basic programming skills, or
No, you just it's completely it's installed. You can download it. It's one-click system.
okay.
So you don't even have to. The only thing you have to make sure, of course, so you need, in this case, it's catered for the ESS. So the only thing you have to reprogram or at least adjust is the types and the order of the variables in your particular data set. Otherwise, it looks for the data, the variables that are in the ESS, and it will give you an error, of course.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to look into that. So another question from Heidi. If you identify issues with an interviewer after the field period, are the interviews completed by the interviewer flagged and reviewed? What percentage of their interviews and how do you determine that?
Sorry, if you, are
Uh,
completed by the interview flag. Yeah, you go back. So if they are still in the field, of course you want to verify what's going on, and if they have a reasonable explanation or it's something like a technical issue within the laptop that they use, then of course we let them continue. If there's something going on, we usually we for the ones we find out, of course, we delete them. We want them to be reissued to another interviewer, and this interviewer is not working on the ESS project. Uh, we've had quite a lot of discussions. I see Peter Lim is present here as well. We've had a few discussions within the ESS core scientific team as well about, okay, if you detect some fraudulent interviews within the workload of an interviewer, do you delete all interviews? And we tend to be quite careful to do that. We say, okay, when it's clear it's fraudulent, we would delete it. If it's part of the questionnaire that clearly was fraudulent, we might just set those on non-response or on don't knows or refusals. But we have to have really clear indications that this person was also falsifying the rest of the interviews before we actually go and decide to delete all their interviews. Uh, the reason being also that it's not necessarily a constant behavior across his or her workload all the time.
yeah,
So there's no clear-cut rule for that.
right. And circling back to the different QC indicators, what's the difference between duration and interview speed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, duration is basically when the interview started and ended, and there also we have to want to go back and point out the need to have the timestamp data at exactly the same place in the questionnaires of the ESS questionnaires in the different countries. Now with the tool of Suite, of course, we provide the questionnaire, so these are standardized, but usually there could have been some differences where they put a particular indicator, but the duration basically means when you start the interview till when the interviewer closes the laptop off. So that's the duration. Interview speed is the number of items, applicable items per minute. And we find this to be a more useful indicator because first of all, it actually just looks at the number of items per interview. We can even zoom in at particular question sections. Also, when I come back to this, if something is not constant, we can do it interview speed for the entire interview and also focus on what we think might be a more problematic section of the questionnaire and see if the average interview speed, how it's developing there. So we do both actually. So that's the difference between duration and interview speed. And then we decided that an average interview speed of 8 throughout the entire interview is suspect.
Does that vary across countries and languages?
Yes, yes. So you have countries that on average tend to have shorter interview time and duration than others. So, but this does allow for at least a within comparison of interviewers who are in the distribution of average interview speed of interviewers within a single country. You can see who the outliers are.
Yeah.
So you tend to focus more within the country than across the country. And then, of course, if you see patterns emerge of countries that have, on average, a higher interviewer speed, then it's something you can clearly also follow up to see, okay, is this related to language or not?
Yeah. So I guess I'll bookend the questions here. So one thing we and I worry about is response rates and how reliable our numbers are because it seems like there's a lot of variation across countries and how much people follow the attempts module and recording every attempt and the different codes. So I think I miss what metrics you use to track that or how you check that they're following the sampling protocol.
Yeah, well, these we have concerns. We share those concerns, of course. We have quite an extensive contact form data protocol and contact form that interviewers are allowed for each attempt they complete, of course, what the result was. And now, with the introduction of mobile phones and things that could be put on there or letters, because one of the things we found out as well in the beginning that if you have this very detailed protocol on your laptop, interviewers are not necessarily going to open their laptop if they have a failed contact attempt because nobody's home. So these sort of things are challenging. And one of the ways we feel that could help alleviate some of the concerns is basically also to um, not only focus on individual response rate levels, but the payment structure also focusing on making sure that your contact data administration is up to standard. So this is, but yeah, it's always you have to trust some of these data, and sometimes this could be reason for concern. So when we come to these interviewer performance rates, and we see an interviewer achieving 100% success rate of interviews, uh, our first thought is not necessarily fraudulent behavior or substitution all the time. Our first thought is usually that person, that interviewer didn't complete the contact form data in proper way, only put in the information when he or she conducted an actual interview. And this is stuff you have to follow up. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I guess we'll wrap up there. So everybody, please join me in thanking Joost for coming and sharing this interesting research. We appreciate you, um, yeah,
Thank
being
you.
here virtually.
You're welcome.
And yeah, thanks for coming. We have our last talk in a few weeks, the first week of December, I believe. So hope to see you there for that.
See you. Do you want me to send you the presentation or so?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
in case anybody follows up, that'd be good. Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you. And have a good day today.
You too.
Cheers. Bye.